hopefully Jenny and Sandy are on their way. We haven't received apologies from them. So I'll declare open our City of Unley Council Assessment Panel meeting, and I'll start. Welcome, Jenny. Yep. We've mixed things up a bit since we've the world's turned upside down. Just starting the meeting, so I'd like to just acknowledge that the land upon which we meet is the traditional lands for the Kaurna people, and that we respect their spiritual relationship with their country. We also acknowledge the Kaurna people as the custodians of the Adelaide region, and that their cultural and heritage beliefs are still as important to the living Kaurna people today. And I'd like to acknowledge any other language groups that might be here tonight as well. Members and members of the gallery, my name's Shanti Ditter. I'm the presiding member of the City of Unley Council Assessment Panel, and joining me tonight are my fellow panel members, Roger Freeman immediately to my right, Brenton Berman next to Roger, and Jenny Boisvert to the right of Brenton, and hopefully later on we'll have Sandy Wilkinson join us. We haven't received an apology from him. Oh, here he is. Hello, Sandy. You're just over there next to Jenny. We have started. And to my left, I have Andy, Gary and Lily. And is Chelsea with us tonight? Amy, sorry. Amy, crowd control. Members, where we have been meeting previously on Zoom, so this is our first meeting back in the flesh after 2 meetings meeting remotely. We have had to alter our meeting arrangements slightly, and I'd just like to thank the team, staff team at Unley Council for facilitating that. Amy, I think, is being the bouncer here, making sure we don't have too many people in the room at any time. So please do try and bear with us as we try and manage the numbers of people in the room. Members and members of the gallery, we meet here as an independent panel. We are independent members who are selected by council, the City of Unley Council, and Jenny is our elected member representative who represents the City of Unley on the panel. We do make decisions based on the development plan, and so we have a set of recommendations before us that the staff have prepared. We essentially get our reports delivered to us the week prior, so we've all had a chance to review the agenda items that we're considering tonight, and we do go out on site to visit each of the sites so that we understand both the development that's being proposed as well as the objections that may have been received in relation to any or all of the sites. So without going into too much more detail, we might go straight into the meeting. No apologies. Any conflicts of interest, members?
I haven't got a conflict, I don't believe, but certainly Lee Mortimer, who was, I think, a representative who was out of time but is here representing in item 1. I knew Lee a long time ago with the kids at primary school and so on, but haven't seen him for a long time. I just thought I'd make that point. Thank you.
Thank you, Roger. Any others? No others, so I'll just note that for Roger. We'll move then to confirm the minutes from our last meeting on the 19th of May. Members, hope you've had a chance to review the minutes. Thank you, Brenton. And was that Jenny? Thank you, Jenny. Any comments or questions on the minutes? All those in favour? All those against? That's carried. Actually, I'd just like to acknowledge James sitting there in the corner who's helping to make the technology work. And this meeting is being live streamed, isn't it? Yes, so I just need to let members of the gallery and members of the panel know that this is being live streamed. So you are being recorded, and material might be available and accessible both in Australia and overseas. So we'll move straight into our first item, which is number 3 Kelvin Avenue at Clarence Park. Now, members, that's an application to construct 2 two-storey dwellings with garages on the boundaries, and we do have a number of representatives wishing to speak. Before we go into that, Andy, did you want to just brief us? There were 2 representatives who are out of time, not invalid representatives. Did you want to just, before we go into that, brief us?
Yes. Council received 5 comments on the application after the public notification period. 3 of those were valid representations because they were received within the time frame. 2 of those were considered invalid because they were received outside of the public notification period.
Thank you, Andy. We'll just move into that. So, Andrea King-Jones, are you in the gallery? Please come forward, Andrea. Your point to present to us is there. That's the hot seat. Yep. So essentially, you have 5 minutes to present to us any new material that you might have. Hopefully, you have had a chance to look at the agenda papers that we have and reviewed the material, including the plans, etc. If you could keep your representation to 5 minutes and essentially to the points that are relevant to this application, that would be good. Thank you. That says talk. Yeah.
Okay. Hi. As you know, my name's Andrea King-Jones and I'm a resident of Kelvin Avenue. I'd like to submit that the proposed development is at variance to the City of Unley Development Plan. The proposed development does not conform to the very first principle of development control, PDC1, as it does not replicate building heights, proportions or siting of the existing houses in the street. The materials, patterns and decorative elements are in contrast to the existing housing stock. PDC 23 reinforces this direction as it also requires the desired character and built form of a development proposal to align with the immediate and neighbouring structures within the zone. This is further reinforced by PDC 29, which advises that the proposal be compatible with the streetscape and the prevailing built form within the zone and the locality. In addition, PDC 32 requires that the appearance of buildings should be of high quality, the visual massing of facades minimised and external fixtures integrated throughout the design methods that have regard to colour finishes, building materials and textures, facade detailing and proportions of solid walling and window and other building penetrations. Also the articulation of walls, roofs and the use of verandas and eaves. I suggest that the proposed detailing and finishes of this application does not integrate with the building materials and textures of the locality and the immediate landscape, streetscape. For example, the honestone veneer to the northern elevation specified in this application does not match the uncut sandstone common to the street and the zone in scale and finish. The quality of the selected finishes and detailing of this elevation are not in accordance with the neighbouring properties and so will not enhance the streetscape. Rather, it will reduce the amenity and appeal of Kelvin Avenue. I have additional concerns around overshadowing and removal of trees. The shadow diagrams are insufficient to determine the impact on the residences to the east and the west of the development proposal. Shadow diagrams for the summer solstice and the 2 equinoxes are also required as the angle of the sun varies depending on the time of year. The shadow diagram should also include an outline of the neighbouring houses in order to successfully assess the shadowing impact. The landscape plan shows new plantings as replacements to the existing established trees to the rear of the sites. The trees specified are species that will not reach the same height as the existing trees, nor their canopy cover. I propose that the natural amenity of the area may be retained by keeping the existing trees to the rear of the property that do not impact the new construction. All immediate neighbours, occupants and existing bird life will benefit from retaining these trees. In summary, I suggest that the proposed selections of building materials, the landscaping and the shadowing information be reconsidered in line with the City of Unley Development Plan, and that this proposal in its current form be rejected. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. I notice on your agenda you have desired character as a specification that says development should reflect the character and improve the amenity of the immediate area in which it is proposed. The assessment, really the bulk of the building is huge, and the front view from where we live across the road is, in my judgment, massive. The building width is from property border to property border, and the only reference we have to the size and bulk is drawings without references. I say that because a lot of sizes are totally pissing. A very similar building was located 2 kilometres away in another suburb and dominates the streetscape. The width of the building was the same, however. The block was wider and there were pathways on either side of the building. Plus, there was rear access to the properties with full width garages at the rear to cater for extra parking required. This is totally contrary to the desired character of the immediate area, in my judgment, and very seriously at variance to the desired character as listed before. PDC 1. The immediate area, as listed in the submission, not the area as referred to by the Planning Department, which can only mean the Unley Council area, not even the suburb area, has a huge proportion of Californian and Tudor-style bungalows, and therefore is not, in my judgment, a dwelling up to 2 stories compatible in form, scale and design with the existing positive elements of the character of the immediate area. It is seriously at variance, in my judgment. PDC 13. The development achieves minimal massing when viewed from neighbourhood properties is completely false. The bulk of the building is huge, and the front view from our place is, in my judgment, a huge mass of box-like proportions. This is my judgment at serious variance to PDC 13. The shadow diagrams provided do not show adjoining property outlines, so they can be easily seen and understood. When they are put into perspective, with next door neighbour property sizing, it can be seen that in the morning at 9 o'clock, the shadowing over the next door neighbour's property is 90% of the width of the property. That's 9 o'clock. Earlier in the morning, the residents next door and even the property 2 away from the proposed building will be enveloped in shade when they need it most to prepare themselves for the day. The proposed building at number 3 is over 40% higher than the building next door to it. And even more at variance with the 2-storey house, one extra house along the street at number 7. In my judgment, this would result in completely unreasonable overshadowing of adjoining properties and is at serious variance with PDC 13. PDC 29, no problems. PDC 45, car parking. The proposed development does not even meet the relevant table UN 5 requirements. Planning documents state that a large variation increase of 50% is required to bring it into line with just the standard. The on-street parking is considered totally inadequate. Even the current single user regularly uses 2 street parking bays to cater for his needs. However, with this proposal, street parking will be reduced in front of the property to allow for an extra street access for the extra property. Unlike as stated in the Planning Department submission, when you have on-street parking near a railway station such as this property, users of all-day street parking from outside our suburb use the street for that purpose when commuting, which is currently what happens.
I'm going to have to get you to start wrapping up. The 5 minutes is up.
That's fine. The number of off-street parking spaces therefore needs to be increased rather than decreased to accommodate the extra parking actually required. In my judgment, extremely inadequate and a variance with PDC 45. And in conclusion, in my judgment, 3 of the 4 items listed as a conclusion on the planning development submission are very seriously at variance with principles of development control assessment. Thank you.
Thank you. Members, any questions? No questions? Sandy, thank you.
Thank you for your submission. Would you feel that the building would fit in better with the streetscape if the upper level was set as far back from the front as it is from the back wall? So
no, I mean,
if it was several metres further back.
Yeah, I understand, but this is a huge building. I mean, I've had a look at the building, as I said, and it's probably exactly the same, or very, very similar to the design of it, and it's just huge. There's no other way to see it. It doesn't matter whether the top floor is set back. He's already set the top floor back from the original submission. The original submission, if you have a look at it, is overhanging the bottom floor. And after the complaints that he had, he's moved it back 1.5. He's moved it back quite a long way, but it makes no difference. You're standing out the front, all you see is the total volume of it. So it's not going to make any difference at all whether the top floor is moved back. That's my part.
If they introduced tandem parking, so they each had a double car park,
that still doesn't give you the minimum that I think is considered necessary in the street. I've mentioned the parking situation where currently we have people parking in the street anyway, just commuters from totally out of the suburb. You go to any train or tram stop, have a look at how many cars are there. You know, I don't know how often you walk past things like that, but they're just everywhere. We're half to 1 street away, and because there's very limited parking in Parker Terrace, because they're not allowed to park there before 10 o'clock, so it stops commuters. They've got to go somewhere else.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Pring.
Thank you.
Next speaker is Lee Mortimer. Thank you, Mr. Mortimer. You have 5 minutes as well.
My name is Lee Mortimer and I'm making representation for number 5 Kelvin on behalf of Patrick Tan. The issues which he believes have not satisfactorily resolved are: 1, the proposed development does not conform to the first principle of development control, PDC 1, and reinforced with PDC 23 regarding replicating building heights, mass proportion or siting. He disagrees with Council's summary of issues, page 7 in Council's report, and that there are no other similar houses in Kelvin Avenue nor the adjacent Parker Terrace. Patrick is looking at this from a street perspective, and the council would presumably be looking at a zoning area. There would be very few, if any, similar developments in all of the Clarence Park RB 350 zoning area. From the representations received, it would seem that the majority of Kelvin Avenue is totally opposed to this development, which has been described as, and I quote, ugly, out of context, an ugly monolith, looks like no other in the street, and effectively a single massive 600 square metre structure, end of quote. 2, overshadowing and overlooking of adjacent properties. The shadow diagrams submitted by the applicant are insufficient to determine the impact on adjoining residents. For example, the 10 west-facing solar panels on number 1 are positioned to provide high output during late afternoon in summer to support the grid during peak period. The latest time shown for the shadow diagram is 3 p.m. The loss of solar input at number 1 and number 1A has not been addressed, nor the loss from any future solar panels at number 5. It appears that the applicant's solution to the objections raised to the overshadowing is to increase the pitch of the roof from 20 to 25 degrees, thereby increasing the height of the roof. Therefore, cannot agree with relevant council-wide provisions, PDC 13, side and rear boundaries on page 11, and I quote, would not result in unreasonable shadowing of adjoining properties, end of quote. The addition of 2 4-bedroom residences has resulted in the elimination of all on-street parking in front of these houses, so cannot agree with relevant council-wide provisions, page 12, PDC 45 car parking, and I quote, car parking is considered adequate according to the projected needs of the users when taking into consideration of the availability of on-street parking, end of quote. So we understand from this quote that this means that the occupants of the proposed homes will be parking in front of our homes, as there will be no on-street parking in front of their homes. If this application is approved, the precedent would therefore be set for any or all of the allotments in Kelvin to be developed with no on-street parking, as most are exactly the same size as number 3. Summary. In this report by council, and I quote, upon receipt of the subject application, administration advised the applicant that the proposed dwellings did not adequately address a number of development plan provisions and that the application could not be supported. The applicant made some small amendments and advised they wished the application to proceed, end of quote. The changes made have resulted in the structure being bulkier and higher and not in keeping with the existing planning and development guidelines and the amenity of the surrounding residents. We ask that the panel, when judging these major deficiencies in the proposed development, to do so with fairness in mind for the affected neighbours and neighbourhood, with references to PDCs 1, 23, 13 and 14 and 45, and having regard to the precedent that future projects. In summary, we also ask that when you're making your judgment calls with these major deficiencies, that you reject this proposal as PDC 1 does not comply, PDC 23 does not comply, PDC 13 does not comply, and PDC 45 does not comply. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mortimer. Members, questions? No questions? Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mortimer. Mr. David Lawrence. Do we have a David Lawrence in the gallery? Thank you, Mr. Lawrence. Mr. Lawrence, you've heard from the representatives and presumably you've read the representations as well.
Yes.
If you could address the matters that they've raised, we'd be grateful to hear from you.
Thank you. Thanks for letting me attend. Firstly, a number of issues. Firstly, the shadowing diagrams are obviously in accordance with all the relevant codes. The shadows that are taken are the longest part of the day and the longest day of the year on the 21st of June. So that gives you the maximum shadow effect. If the representatives are concerned about shadowing on neighbouring properties, we could quite easily show an overlay of the adjoining properties to show that the length of shadow at the longest day is the worst case scenario. So that would be an easy example to satisfy, I think, the representatives' concerns regarding shadowing. As we all know, the number 3 Kelvin Avenue faces north, so the biggest impact of shadow is going to be on the southern aspect, which is going to be their rear yard. It's really the only effect on the adjoining properties is going to be early morning or late afternoon, as can be seen on the shadow diagrams. One of the other issues was the existing rear trees in the yard. Our client currently lives in that residence, and he will be owner occupying the right-hand unit. So he would be well aware of the impact of those trees, whether or not he wishes to retain them. Obviously, that's something we could also consider as well to satisfy the representative's concerns. In regards to the actual application, we took very seriously the representative's concerns, and we did a very extensive review of the designs and submitted the amended designs in accordance with a lot of their concerns. Regarding the bulk and scale, we've actually set the upper story back another 2 odd metres from the front facade. The front setback is also 11 odd metres back from the front boundary, so quite efficient to take 2 off-street car parks as well as the undercover car park as well. So technically there are 3 off-street car parks per residence, leaving then over 6 metres between the 2 adjoining single crossovers as well. We're also be retaining the existing front hedge, the front landscape as well. So that's not going to just be cutting in that new single crossover on the right-hand unit. So that'll still keep a nice softening effect, as well as then the existing street tree will remain as well, which will give a nice street appearance, especially from the other side of the road, because the upper story is also set back. And if you can look on the side elevation, it's actually in the same plane as the lower roof. So we've added a front veranda, a pit roof veranda. So when you're standing at the street, your eye is naturally looking away to the top. So I think the argument for height is really sort of taken away because of the projection that your eye is going to take from standing down on the road at road level. We've looked at another item that the representatives made was the privacy, and obviously you can see from that side elevation that we've got skew glass up to 1.8 metres above floor level. We've set those window head heights at 2.4, so there's unless you're 6'6" or whatever, there's going to be plenty of privacy.
I'm going to have to get you to start wrapping up, please.
No worries, thank you. Like I said, we spent a lot of time and effort in reviewing that design. We had a lot of correspondence and feedback with council, so we tried to work with the representatives' concerns, and I think we've come up with a pretty good design to satisfy those needs. Obviously, we've addressed all the items in the principles of development control. That's been assessed with the planning assessment. So, yeah, I think it's a very good design for that area. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lawrence. Members, questions of the applicant? Andy.
When you originally lodged the plans with a double side-by-side garaging and the first floor overhanging the ground floor, had you actually looked at the development plan?
That was a lot of feedback we got from our client, who had built a very similar home up in Blair, and he lived in that house, and that was the feel that he wanted. Obviously, he was advised by our company to maybe tone down that quite aggressive look. We built a lot of those homes, a lot in the western suburbs around Summerton Park and Glengarry and whatever. So that's a real prominent area of that type of design, which he sort of linked us with. But we were, obviously he was very forthright in his opinion, but we tried to work with him and whatever, and then working with council, we've got that feedback from the neighbours. I think we came up with a pretty good compromise.
So you didn't actually look at the development plan?
Well, certainly, yeah, we look at the development plan, for site coverage, open space, setbacks, that type of thing, as well as trying to blend it in with the existing, which that initial superseded design obviously just wasn't going to be workable.
And do you think that upper level will be visible from the street or not? At 1.5 metre setback on the front facade?
There certainly will be you certainly be able to see it from the street, but the point is it's not a vertical facade, it's running back.
Members, any other questions? No other questions? Thank you for your presentation, Mr. Lawrence.
Thank you.
Members, before we launch into this application, any questions for staff? Well, we may as well launch into it then. I'm in your hands. Jenny, do you want to talk to your proposed motion for refusal?
Yes, I can want to certainly it's my view that Kelvin Avenue is largely distracted by the impact of the business, and it's largely students and otherwise, and that there's no development of this kind of scope. And certainly from the slide, story, the other story that we have to push back from 4 or 5 feet further, with no effect whatsoever on the amount.
Mike,
Yeah, with the amount of the amenity of the building, it would be could still be set back from the rear, and it's still 16 metres from the neighbour at the rear. So I don't think that that's an issue if that were to be moved back. So I guess it's a motion for refusal on the basis of. Yes, well, that's sort of Balkan scales that we know. Yes, that's what one would be Balkan scale, one would be the width of the garage, one would be the height of the building.
The area.
It's insufficient car parking, and I would like to see additional overshadowing diagrams, because if the building is moved back, then there may be a further impact on other rooms. So I'd like to see that, not just assume that that was okay. That's correct. Do you have a seconder?
I have no idea.
Sandy, thank you.
On looking at Kelvin Avenue, it is a very intact street, subdivided in the 1930s. It's comprised of bungalows and Tudor houses. The 350 zone does provide for 2-storey development, but Principal Development Control 1 says development should primarily be for dwellings up to 2 storeys, compatible in form, scale and design with existing positive elements of the characters of the area. Now, the existing positive elements and character of the area are the bungalows and Tudor buildings in this street. There's one project home down the bottom next to the railway line that's contrast with the thing and has a garage on the boundary as proposed with this proposal, which looks terrible. And so whilst up to 2 stories is provided, it's only on the proviso that it is compatible in form, scale and design. And the form, scale and design of this proposal is completely foreign to this street. And there's no point in having that kind of provision in the development plan if a proposal that's this far from the form, scale and design of the buildings that predominate the street is supported. It makes nonsense of having such provisions in the development plan. Then on the garaging is measured by the planners as taken the element of the building that is garage, so from the boundary to the middle section that is not garage, that's how the measurement has been done. So that's 42%. If it was taken by the width of the garage itself, it would be even more than that. But measured like that, if the garaging to the sides was done as carports, not as garages with a brick wall on the boundary, and the building on the at the end of the street on the right-hand side, which has got a garage on the boundary, shows how bad that looks. If that was done as a carport, and looking at this street, every house in the street has got a carport to the side, not a garage with a brick wall on the boundary. It doesn't exist in the street. So if the garages were done like, and there's someone who designs houses like this for my living, it is possible to design to widen the middle section of the building and go to carport to the side and achieve that 30% thing. Would then have a 2.7 metre wide garage door, which is perfectly acceptable. And the garaging, the development plans for a 4-bedroom house seeks 2 cars undercover. The original proposal was for just a narrow passage and a double garage. The design looks like it's been designed so that that internal timber frame wall could later be removed and the double garage put in later. Whereas if the brick wall was brought in to coincide with the middle actual habitable rooms with a carport to the side, that would be as it ought to be. And then, but it looks like when the design was changed, the second car space wasn't actually provided. There's plenty of room, obviously, to do a second tandem car park behind the existing garage to get a double garaging to satisfy that provision in the development plan as well. The design and appearance of buildings and their surroundings should respect the contextual qualities of the locality and be consistent with the desired character of the zone and policy area, and therefore should have regard to various factors. This is clearly not compatible in form and scale with the existing positive elements of the character of the area, and the upper level should be set substantially further back, and I'm thinking several metres, like behind the garage, so that it actually looks like a single-storey building. And in relation to overshadowing, no measures have been made to mitigate the height of the upper level by doing the upper level rooms in the roof space or any measures like that which would meaningfully address those issues. So there's a lot that could be done to improve this development, but I don't even think it comes close to satisfying the provisions of the development plan as it stands. So therefore I'm seconding the motion for refusal.
Any discussion, other discussion members? Thank you, Brenton.
I might make a few comments if I can. I'm very much divided on this application, and the reason I'm divided on this application is because this is a residential B350 zone which encourages medium density housing. When you look at the numbers, it works, and the numbers work in terms of 2 dwellings on the site, up to 2 stories in height, 350 square metres side area per dwelling. It works. The frontage is right. The houses are big. The houses don't quite fit with the desired character statement that's actually written here, and I think there is a mismatch between what the RB350 zone
numbers are saying and what the desired character is saying. So that's where I have my dilemma in my mind going through. I don't have a real issue with the car parking associated with the site. I think there's sufficient car parking on site to meet the needs of the development. I do have concern that with this development, the 5.24 metre frontage for the site, 15.24 metre frontage for the site will mean that building boundary to boundary, the next development will occur boundary to boundary, and I think we'll be getting a lot of those within the streetscape character in the future. I have to also say that I think the representatives spoke extremely well and spoke about the development plan provisions and the issues associated with this application. The applicant also spoke well about how the design has changed from something which I think was totally inappropriate on the site to something which actually has more of a chance. I'm still trying to work out in my mind whether it gets over the line or not. Our job is not to redesign. It's actually to make a decision whether it has sufficient merit to warrant approval. And I'm struggling at the moment as to where I sit on that. So probably that's my comment at this point in time.
Thank you, Brenton. Roger?
Everyone's having a comment. I'll be very, very brief. I think Representative captured it pretty well. I was initially had thoughts that, as Brenton was saying, how it fits with the numbers and what the zone is trying to achieve in the future with densities and so on. However, I think that this, as Sandy has said and as Jenny has moved, this doesn't do that. Doesn't achieve some basic things in the design, and the problem is, to a certain extent, from where it started from. And that's, you start from something that doesn't really get close to the policies, and then you try and massage that back. And I don't think that it doesn't do that because it hasn't thought about the policies and what's trying to be achieved. And I think, as Brenton said, you start to look at, for some reason, the applicant wants a large living space for both dwellings, and I think you need to look at that carefully if you're doing that in your design. So I'm happy with the recommendation, or the revised recommendation.
Jenny, did you wish to sum up? Nope. So we're clear that, can we have that motion again, clearly? So that's a recommendation for refusal for those reasons. Motion, all those in favour? All those against? That's carried. For the purposes of the gallery, that application has been refused. Mr. Lawrence, you'll have to get in touch with the administration to work out your next steps. And we'll move on to the next application, which is an application at 24 Anglo Avenue at Parkside. That is an application for alterations and the construction of an upper storey addition. We've got one representative and an applicant. Do we have Roxanne Crook? I believe she is here. Please come forward, Ms. Crook. Good evening, Ms. Crook. Please take your seat. Thank you for being patient waiting out there for us. We have received your representation and we have read your representation. We've been out on site and had a look as well, so we understand the nature of the application and the representation. Hopefully you've had a chance to review the council officers' report, which we have in front of us tonight, and you've got 5 minutes if you could essentially present to us your case on this matter.
Okay. So my name is Roxanne and I'm the owner of 22 Anglo Avenue Parkside, which is the other half of the building, which is the subject of this development application. So I am the neighbour, but I also live in the same building. We share a party wall and roof space. The applicant has asked me to withdraw my objection. A minor change has been made to remove the panelling on the roof. However, I still have concerns and do not want to withdraw my objection. My main concern is how visible the extension will be from the street and the visual impact that this will have on my home and the streetscape. A 3D representation of what the extension will look like has been supplied. However, it is not clear from what location, height or angle that perspective is. That perspective is from only one point of view, and I'm concerned that from other points of view, the extension will be much more visible. I sent a photo to the panel of what the house currently looks like from the street. When I walk down the street, I can see the chimney at the rear of the property. The proposed extension will be much higher than the existing chimney. So if you can see the chimney, you'll be able to see the walls of the extension. The proposed extension is not confined to just behind the original part of the building, but also goes out to the side. It will be much wider than the original part of the building, which means that the extension is not hidden behind the original part of the building. From the street, I can see the external wall of the existing single-storey extension behind the carport. So if you can see the wall of the single-storey extension, you'll be able to see all of the wall of the double-storey extension above it. The proposed extension will have a significant effect on the appearance of the building of which I own half. I love old homes and I love the character feel of Unley, and that's why I bought my home. The building is a 1930 Art Deco bungalow. My concerns are that no attempts have been made to hide the extension from the street. It will be highly visible and it will look like a box stuck on top of the house. And it's not in keeping with the style, shape and design of the building, which is a single-storey bungalow. And it will fundamentally change how my building presents to the street. This is a unique building in the sense that from the street, the building does not look like two maisonettes. It looks like it's one bungalow. And I worry that a highly visible two-storey extension on half the building will make the building look unbalanced and odd, and will have a huge impact on the appearance and character of my home. It is also not in keeping with the character of the street, which is a street of single-storey character homes. The few houses that do have second-storey extensions are built so that the extensions are hidden in roof spaces or hidden behind the original building, such as 5 Anglo Avenue. No other house in the street has a two-storey extension jutting out the side of the building. I also have privacy concerns that there will be windows overlooking my yards, in particular the front windows overlooking my side yard at the front. The neighbour on the other side has also lodged an objection, and their concerns are overlooking and overshadowing of their property. The proposed extension is not in keeping with the development plan. The development plan states, development should present a single-storey built scale to the streetscape. Any second storey should be incorporated primarily into the roof and not increase the evident wall heights as viewed from the street, and should be inconspicuous in the streetscape without being of a bulk or mass that intrudes on neighbouring properties. This proposed development does not comply with the development plan. It is a highly visible two-storey extension. The extension is not hidden in the roof space. It's not hidden behind the original building. The second-storey external walls will be visible from the street. The second-storey extension is much wider than the original part of the house. It is not inconspicuous and will add a visual bulk and mass that will have a huge visual impact on the appearance and character of our homes. And in light of the above, I ask that the council rejects this application. If the applicant were to submit alternate plans, such as a single-storey extension, I would have no issue with a single-storey extension. Or if they were to submit a two-storey extension, which cannot be seen from the street, such as 5 Anglo Avenue or 58 Grant Avenue, both of which have no external walls or windows that can be seen from the street, I would have no objection. Thanks.
Thank you. Members, any questions for Ms. Cook? Thank you, Sandy.
I have a couple of questions. Thank you. Would you be, at the moment, the gutter line of the proposed addition which has got 2,700 ceilings above the existing 3-metre ceilings of the existing house, is about half a metre higher than the top of the house. If the upper level was done in a way whereby the rooms were done in the roof space and that roof line brought down to more of an attic type, then you'd still be able to see it from the street, but it wouldn't present sort of a full wall as currently presented. Would that...
Did you mean the windows in the roof?
If the gutter and eaves line of that were lowered significantly, such that the upper level addition had raked ceilings rather than a flat 2,700 ceiling as proposed with a truss roof, would that come some way to ameliorate some of your concerns about the streetscape view of the proposal?
I suppose I'm not an architect and I'm not a planning person, so I'm happy.
Sandy, I'm not going to allow that question. It's a very hypothetical question, and it is subject to ensuring that someone's actually understanding the question. I think you're asking a highly technical question. If I could simplify it, I think Sandy's saying if that addition was more or less in the roof, so that it didn't have a large wall,
would it still have front-facing windows?
Well, so your issue is the windows?
Oh, the windows and the wall.
I think that answers the question.
Thank you. The other question is, if the proposal is currently, the development plan seeks a 3-metre side boundary setback, southern neighbours got concerned about overshadowing that impact. If that was reoriented so that rotated, so that it extended further towards the rear, but further off the side boundary, would that be, how would you feel about that?
I think
so
that
it
would
could extend further back, but wouldn't go as far out to the side as the person who's in the other half of this building. See how it's got the bathroom and the dressing room to the left? If they were behind, how would you feel about that?
I think that would be better, but I still would prefer an extension kind of like the ones I sent examples of, like the 5 Anglo and the 58 Grant, where you can only see a bit of extra roof and you can't see any walls.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Roger.
The only question is about your concern about the windows which face to the front, but you're concerned that there'll be a view onto your front area and the side. Now, I'm just struggling to see that with the the roof heights and so on.
In the objection I wrote, I sent a diagram with the arrows.
This one?
I think so.
That's the one that the printout that we have received, a separate document.
So a town planner reviewed the plans and they drew that site diagram. And they suggested that the window that's closest to the party wall might be able to see like into that side area where the pergola is. The pergola doesn't have a roof.
Page 93, members. Thanks, Andy. One question. Thanks, Brenton.
Sorry, one very quick question. I haven't been able to find in the details that we've got. Is this your dwelling, is that on its own separate Torrens title to this dwelling? So it's not strata. It's
not strata.
Thank you. Yep. That's great.
Any other questions? Thank you, Ms. Cook.
Okay, thank you.
Do we have the applicant? I believe, do we have Miss Quinn? Thank you. Please come forward. Thank you, Ms. Quinn. We have your application. If you could respond to the representation plus the material that we have before us. Thank you.
Thank you.
We have 5 minutes.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak tonight. I'm the owner of 24 Anglo Avenue, and I guess part of the reason for the extension is that I actually really love the character and the area of Unley, and I did originally look at places to buy, but I realised I actually really enjoyed the location where I am, and also the character of the home. I realised that moving into another area, I wouldn't be able to get the same character of the home that I love. And I'd found out that there had been a proposal for the extension previously approved by the council, and so decided to pursue that option. Like Ms. Crook, the character of the home is really important to me, and I guess part of the design was to ensure that the property kept in character with the existing house. So whilst some properties might just have a normal sort of frontage, the designer has said to keep in line with the development plan. There's been sandstone put on the front, although part of the issue in regards to that was the streetscape, and the extension is actually over 20 metres back from the street. So, and I guess these are 2D drawings, and so I engaged a 3D designer to show how the extension at the back would look in regards to from the streetscape, and due to how far back from the footpath and also from the current part of the property, you'll find it's on the right at the back of part of the property that there'll be minimal appearance from the street, and that it's the continuation of the roof sort of looks like it will be part of the original roof. So the reason to present that was to show that it does sort of show a single story dwelling from the street. Some of the other issues addressed, Ms. Crook mentioned about the overlooking of the property. Again, the property is so far set back that my understanding is that it wouldn't really be possible to see into her yard and also into the backyard, because we both have pergolas that are set back beyond where the extension is, so that sort of blocks any viewing. There's also on both sides of the property into Miss Crook's yard and also into 12 Regent Street, there's quite a number of trees, so there really isn't a possibility to be able to see even from the second extension. There's some of the I think there's some of the shadowing issues addressed in the other representation. Again, the 3D diagrams show that there should be minimal shadowing in overlooking the property. The trees used in those diagrams were 5 metres, and in reality those trees are a lot bigger than that, so that should even minimise further any potential shadowing issues. Ms. Crook mentioned just then that about it being set out further than the existing properties. I'm not quite sure I quite understand that, because the extension is currently only over the existing part at the back of the house, so it's not going out any further than what the house currently goes out anyway. So I'm not sure if I understand that comment. So if there's an issue that I would need clarification around that. There was also, no problem. There was also an issue about potentially moving some obscure glass subsequent. That obscure glass is in a bathroom, so needless to say, I don't want anyone looking into that either. But yeah, thank you for listening.
Members, questions? Sandy?
Thank you for your response. Have you, when you talked about your design having regard to the development plan, given thought to the development plan provision that seeks a 3 metre upper level. I know the ground floor is already on that alignment,
Yeah.
that the ground floor is allowed to be that close, but the development plan seeks upper level setbacks to be 3 metres as a minimum back from the boundary, and it's also to the north, the southern neighbouring property, who's got trees that may not exist in the future.
Yeah.
So what consideration did you give to the overshadowing of your southern neighbour with that regard to that provision?
Southern neighbour, that's the Regent Street
side. Yeah, 10 Regent Street. There's a pair of cottages which have been split into 2. So that's got a north-facing garden.
10 Regent Street or 12 Regent Street?
There's the one on the left there is number 10, I think.
Yes.
Because that is directly behind the 2-storey addition. It's only 1.6 metres upstairs from the northern boundary.
Yeah, I engaged an architect and designer for this, and I was under the impression that going straight up from where it currently was okay. So that I can't really comment on that. And in regards to shadowing on number 10, there's quite significant trees already shadowing over my carport, which is sort of the area where the extension is. So I wouldn't have thought there'd be any additional shadowing that the trees already provide to that neighbour.
Yeah. So your designer sort of said it would be okay to just go up on that wall. Yeah. So he didn't actually understand the development plan, I suppose. Did you give any consideration to orienting the thing with the wet areas behind the bedroom, so going over your outdoor area so that it wouldn't come within that 3 metres off the side boundary?
As in, so if I'm facing
so it's oriented
to the back,
south at the moment, with the wet areas behind or to the south of the bedroom.
Yeah.
Did you give any consideration to sort of orienting with those wet areas to the west of the bedroom over your current outdoor area?
Yeah. I think we did discuss that, but just because of the sort of rectangular shape of the shape of the extension and wanting the light to come into the bedroom, if we put the bathroom on that side, then it would minimise any of the natural light coming into the bedroom, which is, I guess,
west.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. You've got an east-facing bedroom window there as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Brenton.
Just a couple of very quick questions. The kitchen area below where this extension is going to go, that's got high ceilings, 3 metres ceilings. Is that right?
Yes.
Same as the rest of the house.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah. Did you? I don't like to try to redesign things. It's not our job.
Yeah.
But the extension that's been proposed has got 2.7 metre high ceilings. Did you think about whether it could be a lower ceiling or something just to reduce the bulk of the building? Was that something that was thought through?
So 2.7
for the first
down
floor.
on the downstairs or the
because
upstairs?
your kitchen's already set.
Yes.
One option would be you could actually
lower the
kitchen ceiling. And also then lower the ceiling or the floor to ceiling height of the upper story just to reduce some of the bulk. Was that something that was thought through?
We did consider that, but I guess the issue is that it's a sort of the lounge area opens onto that back area, and so you'd have a drop in the roof, and it would just, to be honest, it would look a little bit silly. Plus, it's not really in the original extension where the kitchen area was done in character of the house to try to keep it looking consistent to the old part of the house. So dropping the ceiling would look a bit silly in a home like that. And also, I guess after getting the 3D presentation drawings done up, it looked like that it really can't, the roof looks like it's a continuation of the current roof anyway. It doesn't look like, so the top of it isn't standing out anyway, so it sort of still gives that single story feel.
Okay. And my last question was, you mentioned that back in 2006 there were plans that were approved for an extension.
Well, that's what the owners told me, whether that's true or not.
So this doesn't match up with those plans that were approved.
Yeah, it does.
It does?
Yes, other than the fact I've taken the gabling off of the back extent. So the design inside is a little bit different in that there's a walk-in robe rather than a larger study.
But the location of the extension is similar.
It's exactly the same, other than the fact that the roof was previously gabled, but because of some of the representations of wanting more of that single-storey feel, we felt that flattening the roof and taking out the gabling would give a more single-storey feel to the property.
Thank you.
Any other questions, members? No other questions. Ms. Quinn, I'll let you take your seat.
Thank you very much.
Brenton, I think we've got a question that staff might be able to answer
Yes,
regarding
please.
the previous approval.
So in our question for staff, in our agenda, it talks about planning consent that was granted in October 2006 for alterations and upper storey additions to the dwelling. One, I take it the approval's lapsed, therefore it has no validity in terms of current considerations. And two, has the development plan changed since that particular approval was issued? Because I probably wouldn't think there was a residential streetscape zone around at that stage.
Yes, that's correct. The approved addition was near identical. The footprint was essentially the same. There was a slightly different roof form to it. It was approved in 2006. It never got building documents were never lodged, so it never received full development approval. It did lapse, and I guess the material difference between now and then is that the development plan has changed. The built form zone was brought in around 2009. In terms of side boundary setbacks, though, I believe that the council-wide PDCs still would have been in place. So the real difference there is the character question the built form brings in.
Primarily about the streetscape character and the view from the street of the building.
Yeah, the built form zone talks about upper levels being inconspicuous when viewed from the street.
Sandy?
Just a question of staff. With the 3D perspectives that were they requested by planning staff, or is that the instigation of the applicant?
I'm not entirely sure, but I was looking at the documents in our document management software, and it did seem as though it came in as a response to the representations. Whether or not that was prompted by staff or the applicant, the applicant might be able to clarify that for you.
Just that the perspectives are taken from an angle, like looking at that front elevation, you see that, and obviously it will be diminished in perspective, but there's not a perspective looking down the driveway where you'd really see that the perspectives are taken from more near the middle of the house, where the house from that angle does more conceal the upper level addition. But the helpful 3D view would have been looking down the driveway, because that's where you'd really see the upper level addition in context relative to the height of the building, and you can't tell. Like I can't tell how accurate those perspective views are. I can't tell whether they're accurate or not, but from the angles that they're shown, it isn't particularly helpful. That's why I'm ascertaining whether perhaps the applicant might be able to confirm.
Yeah, I'll see the representation. So I couldn't go next door and chat or anyone, but I sort of, when we had the discussion, I said, Roxanne suggested that maybe if I got some 3D imaging that could show what it would look like, but then so that's why I got it done.
Thank you.
We've done front on because that's what the plan is done.
Right, thank you.
Any other questions, members?
Just staff, just on those 3D representations. Do you have any comment about them, about their accuracy at all? Or just looking at the, I know that they are taken from someone's down the street presumably, but you look at the overall roof height of the extension and the roof height of the dwelling, which is probably at the same similar setback. They look similar, but the plans don't indicate that. I just don't know how accurate they are. You haven't been able to look at that.
We've got no reason to question the accuracy of it, but setting that aside, if you look at the elevations and setbacks of the upper level, I think even without the 3D perspective, the recommendation would remain the same.
Members.
Just on that, if the perspective was taken looking down the driveway where you could actually see the perspective line of that top ridge and the side of the house, you could better gauge whether those perspectives were accurate. They look lower than I think it would be to my eye, but from the front-on angle like that, you haven't got a reference point to be able to gauge that. It helps with that 3D view is looking at.
Brenton?
I'm going to move as recommended by staff. Whilst this is it's a fairly boxy extension, I'll say, and it could have been reduced in height by, as we talked about earlier, dropping the floor height of the the floor to ceiling height of the existing kitchen, dropping the height of the extension from 2.7 to 2.4 metres, or building the roof space within some of the space within the roof. But I think it gets over the line from a planning perspective. I don't think there's any issues with overshadowing, particularly with the extended vegetation and to the adjacent neighbours. I don't think with the treatment of the windows that there's going to be any issues of overlooking of the neighbours. And the setback of the extension is a long way back on the block. So from a streetscape perspective, I don't think you'll read the extension to the same level as what the plans actually show. I think the plans are misleading in terms of being a 2D vision of this particular application. So based on that, I would move as recommended.
Someone willing to second that motion?
I think, maybe it could be a better result. I think the policies which talk about it's an either or as far as setting into the roof space or being sufficiently distance away from the frontage so as to be inconspicuous. Now, the views of how you might define that, yes, from the driveway, looking straight in the driveway, it's visible. You've got but again, that's just one view of it. So I don't think it is in conflict enough with that principle. And I agree with Brenton about the overshadowing. I don't think that's a major issue. And similarly with I don't believe there's an overlooking issue from those front windows. So I'm happy to support the recommendation.
Stanley?
I'm not concerned about the overlooking. I saw the line of sight thing. I don't think that's an issue. That's overlooking into an area that you can see standing on a footpath, so I don't think that's an issue. But what I do have an issue with is that and I understand why the applicant doesn't want to lower the ceiling height of the rooms downstairs because it's got the original 1930s character ceilings, and that's part of the character of the house that she has liked and wants to buy, so I understand that. But in terms of the upstairs addition, nothing has been done to try and minimise the impact of that. So it's just got a flat ceiling at 2,700 high with a trussed roof on top of a flat ceiling. And when I'm designing stuff where you're trying to minimise the impact of the upper level, you would bring the eave down, you do a raked ceiling for those upper level rooms, and it's got a wet area, it's got a bathroom and a wardrobe with a 2.7 metre flat ceiling that's going within 1.6 metres of the southern boundary where the development plan seeks a 3 metre setback. And the report says there's trees and things. Those are not regulated trees. Those trees could die and be, not there in a few years to come. Then the southern neighbour is faced with a 2-storey wall that no measure has been taken to try and mitigate the impact of that wall to their north, when it could easily be done. It could have a raked ceiling with a lower ceiling in the wet areas and have a higher ceiling in the bedroom, or it could have a coffered ceiling over the whole lot, or it could be oriented with the wet areas behind to the over the outdoor area, which the adjoining owner wasn't adverse to, which is why I asked her that question, which would see that upper level come more than 3 metres off that side boundary as sought by the development plan. So I see that the good intention of the applicant to do something that's in keeping with the character of the house, but I think in practice, in reality, when that's built, it won't be an inconspicuous first floor addition, which is what the residential streetscape zone. And I think by reorienting the upstairs addition and bringing the roof level down, it could readily be made inconspicuous and achieve those provisions of the development plan. So I think it could quite readily be amended, and I would foreshadow a deferral to give the applicant the opportunity to address those concerns that the neighbours have legitimately raised. So I won't be able to support the recommendation as for those reasons. And I think they could quite reasonably, if given the opportunity for the deferral, to improve the scheme and satisfy those provisions of the development plan.
Sorry, thank you, Brenton, keeping me on my toes there. I actually thought this was fairly clear cut in terms of the recommendation. I both went to the site, read my report, looked at plans, but I am swayed particularly by Sandy's comments around the height of the ensuite and the height of that southern wall. I'm not sure that the applicant has sort of employed some design techniques that perhaps could have been utilised in terms of trying to minimise that wall height on the southern side. So I'm not going to be supporting the recommendation, but I suspect that this one's going to get through nonetheless. Brenton, I'm going to hand back to you to summed up. I'll put the motion. All those in favour? All those against? That's carried. So for the benefit of the gallery, that application has been approved, and you will get your paperwork from the council in due course. We will now move to application number 3, which is number 438 Crossroads at Clarence Park. Now, do we have Craig Williams in the gallery? Mr. Williams, please come forward. It's an application for retention of existing dwelling, construction carport, front fence, and 2 two-storey dwellings at the rear. Now, Mr. Williams, you have 5 minutes. We have got copies of your representation. Hopefully you've had a chance to have a look at the council report.
Unfortunately, no, I haven't.
Okay, well, you're going to have to do the best you can then.
Well, that's right. We'll move on. Firstly, let me thank you for the opportunity of addressing the panel. You should have before you a copy of my initial objections to the development proposal. And it's to the second objection that I wish to expand this evening. This relates to the parking of vehicles contained within the proposal. In particular, I believe that the development application, as it currently stands, does not adequately cover the requirements of the Unley development plan, transport movement of people and goods objective 7, which states a form of development adjoining main roads which will ensure that traffic can move safely and efficiently and provide for adequate off-street parking. This objective states that the development will provide for both. I also note Part C does not distinguish between the parking of residents' vehicles or visitors' vehicles, remaining silent on such distinction. but does dictate that the parking provisions must be adequate for the development. It is therefore my submission that the panel must consider if the current proposal has sufficient parking to accommodate all persons residing or visiting the proposed development. If you agree with this submission, you'll find the current proposal lacking. What I assert is there has been insufficient consideration given to provide sufficient parking spaces within the development to cater for the potential number of occupants and visitors' vehicles, and that any subsequent overflow of vehicles will find their way to the nearby pull-out areas located in front of adjoining and neighbouring premises. This will restrict the residents of those premises' usage of the pull-out areas and therefore the ability to safely access and egress their dwellings, driveways onto Crossroad. I speak from experience. I've owned the adjacent premises at 436 Crossroad for 31 years and have resided there for 6. Between December 2018 and 2019, I visited the premise on a daily basis while doing renovations, so I'm well acquainted with the importance to road safety that an unoccupied pull-out area provides. These pull-out areas, which were put in place in front of each dwelling on Crossroad circa 1990, are essential for all road users' safety as they enable vehicles to pull away and stop from following traffic travelling east on Crossroad, reducing the impact on easterly traffic movement. They enable a subsequent reversal into the driveway when the road is clear, and a later re-entry into Crossroad in a forward fashion. This manoeuvre is particularly important to the resident of 436 Crossroad as there is a 2-metre high solid brick wall at the front of the adjacent premises, which prohibits a driver's view of any pedestrians walking in a westerly direction along Crossroad until they step into the driveway. The pull-out area also provides space to decouple a trailer from the vehicle and wheel it into the driveway without impacting on eastbound traffic or bicycle lane. It provides space to park whilst closing a premises gate without impeding the eastbound cycle lane on the carriageway, and provides the residents with more than one vehicle of a method to change over the vehicle's driveway position without both of them having to enter the road. These pull-out areas need to be unoccupied at all times for the use of the residents of the premises. Currently, unwanted occupation of these pull-out areas is an extremely rare event. However, I believe that if the development application is approved in its current form, the occupation of the pull-out areas will increase and create hazard for all road users. I believe this assertion has merit. The proposal has it that there will be 8 rooms available within the development. The author of the proposal has put forward many self-serving propositions as to who and how these may be occupied, ranging from family units to single-person dedicated public transport users, to justify the inadequacy of the parking spaces provided in the proposed development, but notably falls silent on the possibility of all rooms being occupied by residents who each own a motor vehicle, which would mean 8 vehicles for 5 parking spaces. Within the development, there's still no parking provision for visitors. I believe my concerns are justified.
I'm going to need to get you to wrap up, Mr. Williams.
I do not believe that the application satisfies the requirement of the Unley development plan. I'm not opposed to the proposal of a development plan which enables higher density living. What I oppose is this development plan which does not cater for the requirements of the applicants, and that such a mission will cause the residents of the development and visitors to park in pull-out areas on Crossroad, creating a hazard for those residents, which will have lasting consequences for road safety, neighbours and all road users in general. Thank you.
Thank you. Members, do you have any questions for Mr. Williams? Andy.
Thank you for your submission. So you live in the property to the west?
I own the property to the west.
Yes, you live in that one, yes. Firstly, can I ask, was there a tree? It looks like there's a tree missing to the left or to the west of the driveway of the subject property. Was there a tree planted there at one stage, a plane tree? There was a garden area, it looks like, where there was a tree that's not there. Do you recall?
On my premises?
In front of your property, yeah.
There is a plane tree park.
There's an empty garden area where it looks like there was once a tree, but
not in the front garden area, no, yeah. Not of the premises, no.
Yeah. The question I'm just getting at there was, what would your feeling be about having the splayed access to the common driveway for the subject property, coming across the footpath at an angle partially in front of your property. That's something that you would be opposed to or comfortable with. It's got a 7 metre wide splayed driveway, so it goes from the driveway width where it's front of the house, and it splays to 7 metres in front of the existing house.
It's already indicated that's what he intends to do, isn't it?
Yeah.
He intends to splay it, and by that way he'll be cutting across his own pull-out area.
Yeah.
So that would basically negate that area, his area.
Yeah.
Not mine.
But you would be adverse to any kind of access to this property that involved cars traversing in front of part of your property on the public realm?
I don't understand your question, actually. I don't see how, if he was to cut across his own front yard, I don't see how that would impact on my pull-out.
I'll leave that question. Dipty have dictated that they want...
Sandy, if you want clarification, perhaps we can get that from staff.
Yeah, I was trying to get his sentiments on that question. I can't quite communicate it to him. Would some of your concerns about the parking be alleviated if the rear dwellings were pushed a bit north or made a bit smaller so that the front dwelling could have 2 car parks coming off the... At the moment, the front dwelling only provides 1 car park, which is deficient from what the development plan requires. Would you be happier if the 2 dwellings at the back went further back, such that you could park 2 cars perpendicular to the back of the existing house?
That would assist in the number of occupants that could occupy the premises. But still, we have got the same problem, that anyone visiting the premises would invariably be parking in those pull-out areas.
Yeah.
And that's even indicated on the applicant's initial application. He said if we do have any overflow, well, they can pull out those parking areas out the front. Well, my solution is they're not parking areas. They can be used for parking areas. And some people obviously probably do. But they have a more important function of enabling the residents access into their driveway safely. And also getting out of their driveway safely.
The second car park for the front dwelling might be parked there permanently.
Well, that's only got 1 car park. The situation.
Yeah.
But I don't think it will alleviate the situation completely.
Right. Okay, thank you.
Any other questions, members?
So my only other thing would be...
I'm going to... there's no more questions. I'm going to have to get you to wrap up. No, you've had your 5 minutes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Do we have Daniel Elder? Thank you, Mr. Elder. You two have 5 minutes.
Thanks for your time today. Really, I don't have too much to say other than obviously we've liaised with traffic engineers and got sort of their professional assessment of it. It appears that the biggest concern with the representation is the parking side of it and the reversing in that front section. The way it's been designed, I suppose, is all the new parks and cars will be driving out in a forward motion anyway, so there's no real need for that traversing if that's the case of what they are. It's my understanding that they're car parks. So that's it really. It was really just getting that right information there for you. And if there's any questions.
Sandy.
Thank you. Two things I would ask about. My initial question to the adjoining owner, which I couldn't quite convey to him, was whether he would be happy for, rather than having the splay across the front setback of this property, to have the sort of angle coming in across the distance between the front boundary and the curb to the west of the western boundary of this property, so the cars come in at a 45-degree angle, straddle the curb, the footpath and the verge, whilst cars leave, to obviate the need to have this very awkward-looking 45-degree cut-off with a front fence. That's what I was trying to gauge. But I understand from talking to council staff and the report that Dipty have sort of dictated this very odd-looking 7-metre splay which takes out the car park in front of this dwelling.
It doesn't actually take out the car park because part of the land division approval that's been received is to actually extend the current park there, so we'll still maintain the car park.
Okay, well that's good. So given that fence will look very odd there, as the applicant, would you be open to the idea of making that fence like a low fence rather than a high? Because the high fence actually compounds the odd-looking fence line going across the front of the property, whereas if it was a low fence, it wouldn't look so odd. Is that something you would be amenable to considering if we had that as an advice?
Happy to consider it. I think
like 1200
being a main road as well, I think there was also that ability to maybe try and get a bit of a noise barrier to that front home.
Yeah. So the fence as designed is an open palisade fence that won't provide any noise mitigation.
Well, doing a hedge there. So.
And the hedge also won't provide any noise mitigation, but putting heavy glass on the windows would. So you could have a low fence and heavy glass to mitigate that issue and without the house looking odd. So that's why I'm asking that question.
To be honest, I'd probably prefer to stay with what we've got to do the hedge just for that softening effect as well. But I suppose. Or
a low fence with a hedge.
Yeah, a low fence with a hedge. Look, not opposed to it. Yeah.
The other question is, and again, I was asking the question of the joint owner, it's deficient in car parking. It's only got 5, not 6. And looking at it, there's you've got a 6-metre driveway area, and then there's 4.6 metres between that driveway and the back of the existing house. Would you consider either reducing the size of the rear dwellings or moving them further back so that you could get a 5.4 metre distance so that you could park 2 cars for the front dwelling, and then you could provide 6 cars, which would increase the value of the front dwelling and enable double side-by-side parking for the front dwelling?
Sandy, I'm disallowing that question because it involves a redesign. We're here to assess the application that we have before us.
Has the applicant considered this sort of measure?
Yeah, look, I suppose the response to that without going into a redesign is that I suppose the design had taken into account the close proximity to all the local public transport as well. So that was our reasoning behind, and also having that one less part that was required, as well as being able to maintain that park on the front to be able to use for those dwellings. But mainly the Emerson train station, crossroad transport, and also South Road transport is quite close.
No. Thank you.
Members, any other questions? No other questions? Thank you for your answers, Mr. Elder. Jenny, I'm going to disallow you from the debate because item 17.6 of our guidelines, you left the room at the beginning of the representation being presented, so you didn't hear the representor's arguments. So for the purposes of fairness, I'm going to preclude you from the decision making. Members, Brenton.
On the advice from, the referral to the Department of Transport, Planning, Transport and Infrastructure, on page 210 of our agenda, there's a note in here that talks about the Metropolitan Adelaide Road widening plan, which may require up to 4.5 metres of land along crossroads. I'm just conscious of the proximity of this site to intersections. Should that 4.5 metres of land be ever required, how does that work in terms of this particular property? Have you given any thought to that? It is an advice. And DIPTI are the agency responsible, and there will be a referral. There's a consent of the Commissioner of Highways is required for the application in any event. But I just wanted to clarify how we actually deal with that.
My experience is that is a real issue for DIP-T, they would usually use the referral process as to elevate that to us. They've had 2 reviews of this application, and I don't think that's an issue at this stage.
That's my second question. Just to confirm that there has been a land division application approved for this site, which divides the site into 3 allotments plus also the shared right of way. That to some extent, does that restrict any changes that were discussed in terms of pushing dwellings back, providing additional car parking for the front dwelling, etc.? So basically, the land division locks in a lot of the design options that were first being talked about.
The land division was approved. It was approved under delegation. It met all the requirements of the development plan. There was no representations. It was a category 1 development, and it would be category 2 actually. So there was no representations, and it met all the quantitative provisions of the plan. So it was approved, and in some ways it does lock in a similar design. If you were to increase the front allotment size to allow for additional car parking, that would have some implications, I think. The other thing that was approved as part of that was there is a Section 51 clearance requirement for the splay to be provided and for the car parking bay to be extended.
Is the size of the rear gardens of those rear dwellings a minimum requirement? Like, were they required to make a rear courtyard of that size for those rear dwellings, which is pushing them forward? Is the 4.6 metre depth of the rear courtyards of the rear dwellings a requirement of the development plan, or could they have made those courtyards 800 mil narrower to enable double parking for the front dwelling?
I'll probably just direct you to page 128. It's got it does meet the minimum dimensions required for private open space. So does that answer your question, Sandy?
Yeah, so they're only required 3 metres, but they're providing 4.6. Oh, I see, 4 metre, right. Okay, so they're 600 mil more than the minimum. So they could have provided 600 mil less and then provided parking for the front. Thank you.
That would reduce their overall private open space allowance, though.
Yeah.
And I see that they are on the minimum recommended.
Already.
I'm happy to move as recommended.
Yeah, I think it's a 200 zone. There's limited areas in Unley for this on an arterial road. I think the car park, yeah, it's a little bit short. However, the argument applicant, the report talks about Anderson Rail Crossing and Cross Road and South Road, etc. Also, that it is designed so vehicles can enter and egress in a forward direction, which is a major requirement. And so I'm happy to support this development.
Thank you. I see considerable merit in the proposal retaining the bungalow to the front, even though it's not required, but there's a number of bungalows there, so it's a positive thing that that's being retained. I commend the applicant for doing that. And in the light of that, I'm prepared to consider other concessions, I think, to other provisions of the development plan. I would have been happy to see a little bit under the landscaped open space provision in order to provide double parking for the front dwelling, which I think is commercially foolish, but I'm happy to go with a recommendation. I think they'd do better to try and get double car parking for that front dwelling, which they could do with a bit of manipulation on the site, but it's a good thing that they're retaining the dwelling. I think it's regrettable that DIPTI have dictated this 7 metre sort of splay driveway, which are very high fence, would be compounded and look very odd. I think it would be much better if they allowed the considerable width between the boundary and the curve for cars to pull in on an angle to enable the cars to go in and out in development by design. We do that all the time, so but it's not perhaps as busy as Cross Road, but I think there's room to do that. It's going to create a very odd-looking solution, particularly with that high fence, but it's somewhat dictated by DIPTI on this, so I'm reluctantly supporting that thing, but commend them for retaining the dwelling to their credit.
I will sum up with a comment, and I suppose the comment is, this is a block of land which is an RB200 zone. It's encouraging small lot subdivisions, small multiple dwelling developments. The only issue here is it's also a very narrow site. It's 15.24 metres in frontage to Cross Roads, which means that limits the access arrangements, it limits the development potential. Retaining the existing house limits it as well. In the ideal world, this should have been a site that's actually combined to actually be a much wider site where you could actually have a single 6 metre wide driveway, allow two-way movement, provide additional car parking, get some more density on the site. That's the best outcome. Unfortunately, that's not what we've got in front of us. The development plan doesn't provide incentives enough to encourage the amalgamation of sites to create better developments. I think that's a problem with our system at the moment. Notwithstanding that, I think it gets over the line from an approvals perspective, and with DIPTI being satisfied that the access arrangements can be met and all vehicles can enter and exit the site in a forward direction, I think it's sufficient to allow this one to go through.
Yes.
Sure. Thank you for having me. Our initial concerns, as you can see from our submission, that was about lack of detail regarding a wall to be erected on our boundary. We still haven't had detail. I guess we also did question on such a large block why there wasn't no need to build to the boundary, but that's trivial. I'm aware it's all within the guidelines. We don't really oppose to much, and we did receive information the plans have been amended to a 3.5 metre wall versus 8.5 metres. However, when I requested these plans, I was told the applicant would prefer to bring the issue here, so we couldn't withdraw our objection, which we probably would have done had we received enough detail. We own 2 properties bounding this property, 26 and 28 Seaview, so it's 2 entities, and we couldn't ascertain where it sat on the properties, so it made it really difficult to agree or object to anything, not knowing is it 26, is it 28. That's the main thing. How it looks is also an issue, but where it sits on the property is the biggest one. Demolition had already occurred, so to find out, to stand there and kind of try and work it out from the vague detail we did receive, that was quite hard. So we've requested plans. We'd also like details of materials and finishes for the boundary wall, how it's going to look. I did come across some issues going through the documents for tonight because I received information from the planning officer that the reduced length of the wall was 3.5 metres. It says see plans attached. We didn't receive more plans than a 3-page external outline of what it would look like, a drawing. The applicant, however, has mentioned that the boundary wall was reduced to 4 metres in good faith. So for her to say 4 metres and the planning officer to say 3.5, I don't have a lot of confidence in anything that's been given to me now. It was originally 8.5 and we got a reduced one to 3.5, but then the applicant stated the reduction was to 4 metres, so it's very conflicting. We did wish to withdraw after the 3.5. I'd like that to be noted because we didn't want to come here, but the applicant wanted to come here instead and go back to they changed their mind according to the planning officer and wanted to revert to the original plan. My concern is with the limited details we've been provided, some of which are potentially incorrect. There's also a note of the rear yards being shaded by the boundary fence. It's a 1.8 metre fence, pretty standard, not too much shading happening, 2/3 of the proposed wall height. And also it says there is a non-regulated tree growing on the land to be removed. That's not true. There's no trees that shade from that property. So there hasn't been since we renovated our little garden in 26. So that was in November. So there hasn't been any trees there since then. So that is simply not true. Also not filling us with confidence about any of this. Our concerns are we haven't been able to be informed which properties affected. Site plans, survey, floor plans weren't provided on request of the additional amendments. Not knowing what the wall will look like on our side, it makes it hard to support. To know the applicant has intended to build a 4 metre wall when council had assured us it was a 3.5 metre wall greatly concerns me. To have a statement about a tree that is not there and has not been for longer than 6 months. And the planning officer didn't relay to us the information potentially, or I'm not sure what's happened, but it is quite concerning, the details. The overshadowing is still a concern, as is the appearance. There's been no further detail on the appearance. It's been really disappointing, I guess, the level of detail that hasn't been provided, along with variations in information from what the applicant's saying they're going to do and what the council has told us is going to happen. We request that council reject or at least defer this application on the grounds of misinformation and significant lack of detail provided. We'd like this bit to be presented properly and accurately, and our queries be addressed before a decision is made.
Thank you, Ms McLaughlin. Members, do you have any questions? Brenton? Roger?
Just trying to, I guess the applicant can clarify exactly, but an 8.2 metre long wall on the boundary.
Yes.
So that plan
was
showed.
the original that we objected,
Yes.
and we were told it was going to be reduced to 3.5.
Yeah, but the plans that we have are 8.2. That's all. I just want to clarify that, and I guess we can ask the applicant if that's
Okay, so they've
exactly
gone back to
what
the
is-
original, which is what we originally objected to. So yeah, I
Okay.
guess we're concerned still.
And you're concerned about overshadowing and so on. This is all single story.
Yes, it was just a slight overshadow we were concerned about, and the appearance was the main concern.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions, members? Sandy?
You spoke about the length of the wall
Yes,
being 3.5 as opposed to 8.5.
yes, and then 4 as well. There's
Right.
been a few different.
Yeah. So would you have been happy if the wall was as high as it is, but 3.5 or 4 metres?
We said that we would agree to that and withdraw our objection.
Right.
We wanted further detail on the appearance.
Yeah.
But we said, I spoke to the planning officer and I said we were going to withdraw our application. Why are we being taken to this meeting for the original wall when we've said we don't want to go any further? Like we don't want it to not go ahead. However, going through this and seeing all this misinformation, it's really not, it doesn't give us a lot of confidence now.
Okay. And given the proposal has got a pantry and laundry cupboards on that, such that the height could be at least a foot or more lower, could be 1,800 under cupboards. I mean, would you, if you're given the option between a wall that high that's 3 or 4 metres long, or a wall that's that long but was lower, what would you prefer?
Well, without the detail of what the wall is,
Regardless of the same material, so if it was a
but if it
long
was-
low wall
and you're
or
saying
a high
like-
short wall, what
Yeah.
would you choose between?
probably the longer short. If it was 1.8, that's our current fence. I'd be happy with that. I'd be happy with it to be 8.5 metres, and absolutely.
It'd be more than that with the floor structure as well. But
But yeah,
2 feet lower.
no, that would be absolutely would address our concerns.
Yeah.
I just feel the concerns hadn't been addressed or even interpreted in.
Sure. Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions, members? No other questions? Thank you, Ms. McLaughlin. Do we have Zach Diamanti? Mr. Diamanti, you have 5 minutes.
Okay, I'm a bit intrigued as to the lack of detail, because the plan shows brickwork and it shows gutters and shows all the detail of what the building's constructed from. So I don't know whether we have to give the type of brick and the type of mortar we're using, or whether that's enough detail, which I understand is enough for a planner. When we first got the objection, yes, we did. We reduced that laundry area and put it on the other side of the house, which was, to all intents and purposes, the wrong place to put it, on the driveway side. However, we did that with a view to perhaps getting the objection withdrawn. My understanding, or our understanding, was that the objection was not going to be withdrawn. So the owners decided to go back to the original 8.5 or 8.2, sorry, which is within council guidelines, I guess. And yes, the tree was removed. It's not a listed tree, not a particular species, so that was removed going back ages ago. And if you look at the Google shot from over the top, that tree shaded the whole backyard, and it was, I think you see it up there, it shades the whole backyard. That's the nearest one to the back of the house. Showed the whole backyard. Now that's gone. That was 12 metres high. It's now 3 metres high, which is within council guidelines. So I'm not quite sure why we would object to any of those things. The current fence on my last measure was actually 2.1 high. The height of the wall is 3 metres, which is much higher than the current fence line. So I'm a bit confused on that one as well. I guess as far as the application's concerned and the report's concerned, we met every guideline that's in the development plan. I don't think there was one thing that we dropped out on. And I guess if the development plan is there for a purpose and we've ticked every box, I'd be surprised if we didn't get an approval tonight. Yeah, I think that covers about all the things we need to mention.
Thank you, Mr. Diamanti. Members, do we have questions? Sandy?
You're the designer?
Yep.
Yeah. Did you give consideration, given that the pantry and laundry cupboards there, which need only be 1,800 high, did you look at an option of minimising the wall height by using the fact that you had cupboards there, by having an addition that stepped down like that? Did you look at that as an option to mitigate the impact on the roof?
We did talk about dropping that height
just
of
over
that
the cupboard.
separate roof,
yeah,
and creating a bulkhead over those cupboards so that we could drop the roof down another 300 or 400. It seemed pointless because we were within the guidelines anyway. The development plan says we can build up to 3 metres. The owners were not too keen to end up with a raked roof or raked ceiling inside to get that height. So we maintained the same level.
No, I wasn't talking about a rake, it was about steps.
Yeah, slipping the
same ceiling height drops down where the cupboard is.
Yeah,
and the walls.
Well, you would have had to pitch the roof lower to get that and drop the roof. So we were trying to keep, we're down, I think, to 2.5 in that area. Probably about as low as you could go without feeling a bit crunch, I suppose.
Thank you.
Any other questions, members? Thank you, Mr. Diamanti.
Thanks.
Members, do we have any questions for staff? Brenton?
Confirming with staff, I just want to ask the length of the wall on the boundary. Can you please confirm what we're actually asked to consider tonight?
Any other questions? Sandy?
I can't see where it does nominate the height, the maximum height of that wall. The land falls to the north, where it nominates that it's within 3 metres at the highest point. Can you direct me to where it shows on the plan?
This plan shows it, Sandy. Got this one, just in there. It nominates the height there.
Relative to the adjacent ground level?
Floor level.
But is that at the point at the northern end of that addition with that section? So that section's near the southern end through the pantry, it appears. So at the northern end where the land is falling, it will be higher than that.
Mr. Diamanti, would you like to come forward?
On the eastern elevation, there was a line that drew where the fall of the land was. Yes, on the eastern elevation.
There's a dotted line.
Yeah, there's the fall of the land line, if you like. So it's the section is basically through where the end of the word wall on boundary is. It's through that area there. So at its worst point, it's about 80 mil higher.
On the east elevation, it looks like it drops 3 or 4 courses.
On the east?
On the east elevation?
Yeah.
Look,
yeah,
it's dropping 3 or 4 courses across the length of that wall.
You're working from the start of the pantry. The section goes through the middle of that wall.
Yeah.
Okay. So it goes through the middle of the wall, so it's about 2 courses.
Thank you, Mr. Diamanti. Any other questions, Brenton?
I'm happy to move as per the recommendation. The proposed development satisfies the policies in the plan, height-wise and length-wise, similar to the garage. So happy to move as per the recommendation.
Thank you. Seconder, Brenton. Thank you, Brenton. Any discussion, questions, members? Sandy?
I note that this lovely bungalow is in the landscape zone where demolition of the house would be allowable. It shouldn't be the case, but it is. So I'm pleased to see that the house is being invested in and renovated. I'm pleased to see that's happening, being the bigger picture. The development plan does allow for 3 metre high walls on the boundary. I think it's regrettable that it doesn't actually seek a lower height than that, which can be achieved by putting cupboards and things on the boundary. But the development plan, but it is of note that when there's a falling site there, this I think it's more like 3.3 metres at the northern end because of the fall in the land. But I think whilst it would obviously be better if it were lower using cupboard space, the development plan doesn't dictate it, but we perhaps could have required the wall to be a foot lower based on 3 metre being meant to be the maximum height. That's not the approximate, it's meant to be the maximum height. So if there's a fall, if there's a wall on the boundary and the land falls, then the maximum height of that wall on the boundary should be 3, which means where the land rises, say it rises 300 mil over the length of that wall, it would then be 2.7. So I think that that's how that principle ought to be taken. On the
support this one on this occasion.
Any other comments? So I will make one last comment in relation to your last comment, Sandy. All of this is a balance, and we can chip away at 100 mils, or we can chip away at bigger things. So yeah, we'll move to that.
I was going to sum up. Yes.
Yes, I'm allowed
Even if
to
it,
sum up.
even if it was
Right,
it was a bit higher, I still would be moving the recommendation.
Thank you. I'll put the motion. All those in favour? All those against? That's carried. That is an application for an approval. We'll now move to an application for the removal of a tree at 39A Davenport Terrace. And do we have Dean Nicole in the room? Thank you. Yeah. Yep, just press the microphone button where it says talk.
There we go. I'm here in a professional capacity representing the applicant on his request as a consultant arborist, botanist and ecologist. So I assume you've all read my report on the subject tree, and I don't really want to rehash too much of that other than quickly going through the principles of development control and how I've actually read that. In terms of the ones that relate to significant trees, of course, so Principle 8A1, I've assessed the tree as its useful life expectancy has been surpassed or exceeded. Principle 2 there, or 8A2, I've assessed the tree as representing an unacceptable and continually increasing risk to safety, so the risk is going up over time. And those two things have to be taken in light of Principle 8A4, and that's looking at alternatives to tree removal, of course. And I don't believe there are any other alternatives to tree removal to mitigate the risk and the increasing risk to safety and to property in this particular case. So that's where I'm coming from in my support of tree removal in this particular case. Now, you've had me here before, I think, in the last year or two, but I also want to point out that I'm not anti-tree at all, and in fact, I've actually published a heap of books that promote trees and encourage planting of trees, and particularly eucalypts in the urban landscape. So I've got a reputation for being unbiased with my tree assessments, using science in the tree assessments and in honesty in assessment. And for that reason, I certainly don't please all of my clients, all the people who come to me wanting advice. I tell them what they need to hear, not what they want to hear. But of course, occasionally something ends up here because I have recommended the removal of a tree. It may have been rejected, and here we are. So I guess I'd just like to open it up to questions. And if you've got any questions, put them forward to me. That's why I'm here. Particularly with regards to the option for pruning the tree. In my report, I mentioned that I don't see any alternatives to tree removal to mitigate the risk in this case. But I did go into further detail in an email to the applicant, and I believe you have a copy of that email in the documents as well. Thank you.
Members' questions? Brenton?
Dean, two quick questions. One is, roughly what's the age of the tree? I couldn't find that in any of the arborist reports.
It should be in my report.
I must have missed it, I'm sorry.
And so I don't say something different. I'm going to look it up.
Very wise.
Estimated age 30 to 60 years.
Right.
So that's quite a broad range, but that's because it's difficult to age trees like this. But we do know it's planted. We do know it's exotic to the locality, and we can get an approximate age based on the circumference, the trunk circumference of the tree, knowing when a lot of them were planted.
And second question relates to the species, being lemon-scented gums. Can you give us a bit of background? My experience is they drop branches.
And it's really variable from tree to tree. So when people talk about the trees that drop the most branches, they always talk about river red gums and lemon-scented gums. But that's partly because river red gums and lemon scented gums are the most common trees on the Adelaide Plains. So they're the trees that drop the most branches because they're the ones we have the most trees of. But when you look at it on a tree by tree basis, there is a lot of variability in a lemon scented gum. Some specimens have no history, trees much older than this will have no history of branch failure. Their structure is very good, and they're relatively safe urban trees. Other individuals, such as this one, for various reasons, partly associated with its very high vigour, tend to shed a lot more branches. And this tree has evidence of shedding a lot of branches in the form of branch scars all through the canopy of the trees. So I certainly wouldn't say that lemon scented gums are prone to branch failure. You really need to look at the individual tree level to say what's going on there.
Roger?
Yeah, a couple of things. One is the scoring that you've used in Table 1, and which is obviously pretty critical to assist us in making a decision. You've used a different scoring than the council's arborist and so on. However, I just want to ask a couple of questions. One is useful, and these things are critical because it tips the score. And one is the useful life expectancy, which I see is defined in Arborman's report, and I presume it's the expected number of the years that the subject specimen will remain active and sound and or continues to achieve the relevant principles of development control. Now, you've put the useful life expectancy of less than 2 years, which gives it a score of -20. So that's pretty critical in relation to the application. And can you just explain how you've come to that conclusion about a tree which is in excellent health and would appear to have a fairly long life expectancy?
Sure. In terms of the life expectancy, I haven't related that directly to the principles of development control. So I'll use this table for a non-controlled tree, for a regulated tree, or for a regulated significant tree, in terms of working out what the retention value of the tree is. With a single tree like this, a retention value table doesn't tell you an awful lot unless you've got other trees to compare it to. So it's more useful when you've got a population of trees, and then you can rank all the trees from the lowest value tree to the highest value tree. When I talk about life expectancy, there's two ways I put it. One is the actual life expectancy, and that's how long the tree will live in biological terms. So it's how long it'll have green leaves on it or is capable of shooting green leaves. The useful life expectancy, which can be quite different, takes into account the tree in its urban setting and how long it'll usefully fulfil its function there, both maintain a acceptable risk to safety, but also fulfil its function in terms of biodiversity and landscape value. So you can have in theory, you can have a dead tree, its life expectancy is exceeded, but it'll still have a useful life expectancy if it can be retained safely in the landscape and it has some sort of aesthetic value. More typically though, you'll have an actual life expectancy which is more than the useful life expectancy.
Yeah, but just to cut to the chase, if I may, why have you rated this? Its useful life expectancy as less than 2 years?
Because it's got to a stage of where the risk to safety is unacceptable, and that risk is only going to go up over time.
Okay.
And it can't be managed through pruning.
Well, that just goes to my next question, which in your report, on page 6 of your report, you talk about risk to safety. You currently consider to be moderate and marginally unacceptable and increasing over time as branches continue to increase in length and so on. The risk to safety is also highly correlated with the under canopy use of the site. What is the under canopy use of this site?
It's a residential allotment.
No, what's the under canopy of use of this particular site? I know it's a residential allotment, but where it is and what's the under canopy use?
Okay, well, it's on a boundary line, so it's actually over 2 residential allotments plus a public area. So the use of all 3 areas will obviously, well not obviously, but are usually slightly different. And it will vary depending who lives there, whether they have children, how often they go underneath the tree. So,
but is this just? I just want to cut to the chase because it's the majority of this under the canopy is a shed, isn't it? And it's between a fence and a shed.
In terms of a structure,
Yeah.
But the risk to safety, the highest risk to safety is when you're outside of the shed, not when you're in the shed.
Yeah, but the space where it is, where the people on this allotment can access this bit of land, is between the fence and the shed, which has got some rubbish in there as far as I can see.
Yep.
Anyhow, I know what you're saying. I understand what you're saying, and
it's a relative thing. So obviously,
right.
if this tree was in a reserve where the likelihood of people walking underneath it or sitting underneath it is less, then the risk will be lower, all other things being equal.
Yeah.
And similarly, if the tree is in a childcare centre where occupation is much higher underneath it, everything else being equal, the risk will be much higher, of course. So that's why what happens underneath the tree is fairly critical in assessing the risk related to the tree.
I agree. Thank you.
Any other questions? Andy?
Arborists that I have engaged in my professional life have employed cabling to mitigate risks for clients who are concerned about tree limb drop.
Yep.
That's a direct way of addressing the risk factor, which is what you've been on about. How much experience with using cabling have you professionally had, and have you looked into this option for this particular tree for your client?
Yes, I do often recommend cabling as a method to reduce or control the incidence of branch failure.
Yes, to catch the falling branches. Yeah.
Either catch the falling branches or actually stop them splitting apart.
Yes.
In the first place, there's various ways to do it. Yeah. I'm not actively involved in the practical application of cabling, just like I'm not involved in actually pruning trees or removing trees. Yeah, that's a good analogy. Yep. Cabling does work really good in certain species, particularly in species such as oaks and elms, winter deciduous European trees. In eucalypts in general, it's not used very often, and particularly in individuals like this, I wouldn't recommend it because the tree is not fully grown. So the branches generally need to be fully grown. They need to be in their position as a mature tree to recommend cabling, because otherwise you'll cable branches, but then they'll grow much longer and the cabling will be too far down. The other thing with a lot of eucalypts is they have relatively brittle wood, and cabling doesn't work very well in species with brittle wood either. The type of branches that are also failing in this tree aren't what they call the primary scaffold branches, or the main framework of the tree. It's all the secondary branches, about sort of arm or leg thickness or smaller. So there'd be literally 50 or more of those branches in this tree. So even in theory, if cabling did work in this tree, it would require an awful lot of cables, and it would require recabling as the tree got bigger over time.
Brenton.
Last question. Apologise, we're going through lots of questions. The tree itself is on the boundary between two properties. The application is from RR10. The other neighbour who has half the tree, what's their position on this?
That sounds like more of a legal question, actually, but it'll help to know how the tree actually grew. So when the tree is small, it'll have a stem as thick as my pencil. Mm-hmm. And if that's the fence line there, the tree would have been like this, and tight. You guys there can't see it, and entirely within the applicant's property. Mm-hmm. As that trunk gets thicker over time, that's when it encroaches onto the neighbour's property. And at the moment, even though it looks like it's, you might say it's 50-50,
yeah.
Even if it starts, 20 or 30 centimetres as a seedling on one side, the bigger the tree gets, the more even it gets on both sides of the boundary. So the tree would have originated on the applicant's property, mm-hmm. even though now, just looking at the trunk, almost half of it is on the neighbouring property.
And what's the neighbour think about the removal of the tree? Because this is subject to Category 1, which means it hasn't been through public notification. So is there a letter of support from the neighbour to remove the tree? Or I'm just curious.
Yeah, that's probably a question for the applicant. I did speak to the neighbour, however, because when I went back to measure the trunk circumference, I had to have access to both sides of the fence to do that. And the applicant and the neighbour seemed fairly friendly, and they were happy with me measuring it. They were aware of what my recommendations were, and there didn't seem to be any conflict. But other than that, I can't say. That's really a question for the applicant.
Any other questions? No? Thank you for your presentation.
Thank you.
Sounds like there's some questions for staff, though.
And I asked that one question of staff. Because this is Category 1 notification, which means the neighbours haven't been formally notified, do we know what the view of the neighbour who has part ownership of a tree thinks of the application and the removal? Is there a supporting letter, anything of that nature?
Bear with me for a second. I'll quickly look up on our system. I don't believe there's that fair question. I don't believe there's anything in the report that alludes to that.
Are there any other questions? No other questions? Do you want to, regardless of what the answer is, Brenton, do you want to elaborate on why you're asking the question?
There is an issue of joint ownership. Whilst the tree commenced on one property, it actually does cross over the boundary. And I would feel, in terms of its removal, well, I'm also torn in terms of the recommendation before us is for refusal. But we've just heard from the applicant's arborist. We've got differing views from arborists through our report. We've had experience with some of these trees in the past. I have some reservations about the recommendation that's before us, and I would feel I'm probably leaning more towards approving the removal of the tree rather than the removal of the tree, but I'd also be very keen to understand what the adjacent neighbour's position is on that particular tree as well. If they are concerned about its removal because of branch dropping and damage to the property, risk to the family, I would feel much more comfortable in approving the application.
Roger? No, I'm not going to allow that.
But I don't think
description we got.
I don't think that's relevant. I think my comment about what Brendan is saying is that we have another application for tree removal where we do have quite a number of neighbours who have given their view on the safety aspects or whatever, or the aspects of the tree. This one hasn't. We don't know why. And I guess in some ways that's just the way it is. They haven't indicated whether they... No, but what I'm saying is the other one we have got, the applicant has gone to them or to the neighbours and asked them, or the neighbours have maybe raised it with the owner of the land originally. We don't know. We haven't got any of that here, so I don't think it matters to me, to the assessment of the application, about whether they want it to go or not to go. It's about whether the policies in the plan are conflicted or not, and that's based on the advice of the applicant's arborist and the other arborist, and our assessment of that advice. That's my view.
Do we have an answer?
We have an answer. There is a requirement for council to notify the adjacent owner of the tree application to remove it under Reg 18. I've just checked our system. It looks like that hasn't been done. There is, however, still the civil matter that the tree is co-owned, I believe. So my understanding is they would need consent of that adjacent neighbour to remove it as well. So there is that safeguard there, but it looks as though there is a process we should have gone through under the regulations. And that it appears that hasn't been done.
Members, how do you want to proceed with this? Jenny?
I'm happy to
For the refusal?
That's right.
Is there a procedural issue here that we're obliged to do, that because the application was not subject to public notification? So whether there's a decision to refuse the application, we may have a procedural motion that needs to occur that actually is to defer the application to allow the process of public notification to occur so that a proper assessment can be made. The tree still is retained there in its present form until that process goes ahead. But I don't think it is.
Our advice is that there is a procedural requirement for us to do that. My recommendation is that the matter's deferred and we seek to do that.
Is someone willing to move a deferral?
Happy to move a deferral. I think that's the way to go. The tree stays there in the interim. It'll come back in a month's time, and for a decision to be made. Is that requirement because it's on both properties and it's not a Cat 2 notification as such? It's just a
notice.
A notice to the owner of.
They have 5 days to provide us a response.
Yeah. Okay. Look, I think we need to get the procedure right. Otherwise, you can invalidate any decision we might make. So.
Do I have a seconder? I'm not going to allow any further debate from the gallery. Thank you. Sorry.
I'm going to second that, and in doing so, I think the arborist has provided excellent advice as to where the tree originated from, but because of the fact that the tree is crossing boundaries now and there is a procedural requirement, I think that we need to allow that process to occur before a proper decision can be made.
Any further debate, members? Sandy?
I would have thought we would only get to that point if Councillor Bover's motion failed and then an alternate motion was put at that point.
Jenny didn't have a seconder, so we didn't have a seconder. We didn't call for a seconder because we've been debating it. So for the purposes of procedural fairness, I think we need to go through the procedure, and the fact that staff have alerted us to the fact that they have missed a step. I think, yes. And for the sake of fairness to the tree, if nothing else, I think no decision being made is probably the right, because we're not deciding the fate of this particular tree. So I'm comfortable with that. So I'm going to.
Just to clarify that, it's really important. It's really important because if we did vote to refuse the application, there's an appeal right for the applicant, and if they go to the courts look at it and say you didn't follow procedural correctness to do this, and it comes back and starts all again. So really, there's no point in making a decision. So that's just to clarify.
I'll put the motion. All those in favour? All those against? That's carried. Thank you. Thank you for the question, Brenton.
Sorry.
All right, so 17 Mill Street at Clarence Park, and I've lost all my paperwork. No, I haven't. We don't have any representatives, but we do have the applicant, Mr. Peter Tuvia. Do members feel like we need to hear from the applicant on this one? No, but stay there because we might have some questions. We have a recommendation for approval on this application. Members, how do you wish to proceed?
I'm happy to move into for as recommended for this particular one.
Thank you, Jenny. Seconder? Do you have a seconder? Brenton? Any questions for staff? Do you wish to sum up, Jenny? I'll put the motion. All those in favour? All those against? You have an approval for your application. That was easy, wasn't it? Sorry you had to wait all this time. Next application is 6 Charles Street. And again, I have lost my place. This is another removal of a tree. Members?
As much as it breaks my heart, I think I'm going to move in terms, and that is that the tree be removed. I don't think, judging from the reports that we have, that it's safe to keep it in those yards.
You have a seconder? Roger? Sandy?
I usually move to retain the trees, but having read these arborist report, I mean, this is a magnificent tree. It's a landmark in the area. But having read the arborist reports and looking at the specific condition, I mean, every gum tree drops limbs, and every owner who doesn't like sweeping up leaves wants to chop them down because it's going to fall on their children. You know, we get that all the time. But and we'd have no trees left if we let everyone get chopped down. But reading the arborist report on this particular aspect of this particular tree is that at the lesions of the branches, where it's getting water ingress that is actually rotting the structure of the tree, which is going to cause, you know, and across the entire, it's happening in multiple locations. It's a rare situation, I think, where this particular one, I think it is a valid safety issue, despite being such a magnificent tree. And I don't normally vote this way on tree removal, but given the particular structural issues of this particular tree, and reading the arborist reports on this, including those engaged by council, I am happy to, and the recommendation is for allowing the removal of this particular one, whereas other administration recommendations have generally been not to allow the removal of significant trees.
I'm just going to put my 5 cents worth. I found it, it was good to see the council's arborist reports, which in my view presented a much more balanced view of this tree than the applicant's material, which quite frankly I found a little bit alarmist and unhelpful in fact. And just to put on the record, I think for applicants applying for tree removal, providing such alarmist sort of reports is actually not helpful in terms of helping us to make assessments of whether or not to retain trees in our urban landscape. And this is the very reason we have, you know, qualified arborists in our midst to be able to give us a good balanced view of whether or not trees should or should not be kept in our landscape.
I don't think it was the applicant. I think that was a neighbour, wasn't it? That the Adeline Tran, is it? Or, I think she was a neighbour who provided all that emotive, very emotive stuff, rather than the applicant. Yes.
Agreed.
Yeah, but yeah, I agree with you wholeheartedly, presiding member, on that. I agree, and I think it's worthwhile to look at, in relation to the application we've deferred, about the matrix retention value for this tree and for that one. And we can come back to the next meeting, but I see a massive difference. You move something slightly to the left, it makes a big difference in its score. And so anyhow, but yeah, I'm happy. Sorry.
All right. Well, Who moved that and who seconded? Thank you, Jenny. Did you wish to sum up? Okay, I'll put that. I'll put that motion. All those in favour? All those against? That's carried. 25 Roberts Street at Unley. Andrew Phillips. We may or may not have you come forward. And we do have more information. Yes, where's that gone? Members, did you have questions in relation to this application?
Was a perspective view of the proposal in its context requested to assess the proposal?
Do we need to call the applicant forward, Andy?
I'll give you a copy of this.
Oh, right, okay. Yep, thank you.
I don't believe a perspective view was requested. It's not really a standard further information request in terms of information provided.
Any other questions?
So can I just maybe ask the applicant, given that you've seen that copy, if you come forward, please. Sorry to take over.
That's all right. You can run the meeting, Roger.
I think, and I understand what the representative is saying. I think you probably covered it in your other comments, but could you just comment on? I suppose it's that concern about that boundary wall on her boundary, the impact on her windows in her living area, and so on. Could you just maybe comment on that, please?
So I provided a little sketch around the sun angle in the middle of winter. And I think it illustrated that if we built a villa complying with the current setback and built exactly the same as what is on both sides of this property, there'll be less light getting into those windows. Yeah, because the dictating point is the ridge of the villa. And certainly we're very mindful that the existing fence there is just under 2 metres high along that boundary at the moment. And there's also about the floor level of the new property was slightly less than the existing property, as dictated by the laneway and council requirements. So effectively the floor level of the proposed development would be approximately 100 mils above the floor level of their house. So the way we've actually set up the height of the wall is actually from their natural ground level, not our natural ground level, to keep it down to less than 3 metres.
Any other questions? No other questions? I shall let you take your seat in that case. Thank you. Questions of staff? No. Members, how do you wish to proceed? Sandy?
I think the proposal has a lot of very positive aspects. The floor plan is beautifully oriented to the north. The diagram from the applicant demonstrating how the winter sun will get into the top half of the southern neighbour's windows. It's very clear and conveys that it's satisfactory in terms of overshadowing. The two-storey element at the rear is adjacent the neighbour's garage, which is on the boundary. I wouldn't ordinarily be supportive of a two-storey structure that close to the boundary, but given in this particular circumstance, it abuts the neighbour's garage on the boundary. I'm comfortable with that. And I can see that endeavours have been made by the architect and the council staff to make the front streetscape treatment pick up on heights and elements of the streetscape. But I just want to read some aspects. It talks about the streetscape attributes in this built form zone. It says infill dwellings ought to be of proportions appropriate to their sites and maintain the spatial patterns of traditional settlement. There is a consistent and recognisable pattern of traditional building proportions, wall heights and, importantly, widths, and overall roof heights, volume and forms associated with the various architectural styles. Key elements, verandas and pitched roofs, the detailing of facades, traditional materials, etc. Development should respect and enhance the desired character. And replacement of a building detracting from the desired character, such as the existing building on the site, which is a 50s nothing, 60s nothing building, will respectfully and carefully relate to the adjacent design buildings. Characteristic patterns of buildings and spaces and gaps between the buildings in localities of distinctive and generally coherent character consistent with pertinent desired character should be composed in a more traditional manner, adopting key building elements, materials and detailing complementing the characteristic architectural style. In the report, it states that the locality is not consistent. Yet, when I looked at the locality, I would certainly accept that statement for the western side of Robert Street, which is the Dog's Dinner. But the eastern side, from number 1 through right up to the corner of Young Street, is almost entirely intact villas like the ones on either side. There are 2 two-storey reproduction buildings which were built before the current development plan. There's one group of home units at the far northern end, but the rest are all turn-of-the-century villas with 3.6 metre ceilings and hipped roofs. So it is an area of a generally cohesive character. It is not a disparate character in this particular streetscape. But even if one were to accept what the planning report says that it's a disparate character, Principle 12 says in localities where the built form and character are incoherent or generally in discord, development should redevelop a site by replacing the discordant elements and better support the desired character. So either way, the development plan is seeking more guidance on the form of the building as it presents to the street. I've got no issue with the floor plan and all the layout, and it's been dealt with very well. It's just how it presents to the street. And the buildings, all of those 10 villas on that side of the road, they're all about 11 metres wide, and they've all got a 4 metre wall height. This proposal has one section which has that sort of wall height, but then it has a low section which is described as a veranda, but it basically presents like a 6 metre wide carpet. I'm moving a deferral. To enable the applicant to redress the provisions in the development plan pertaining to the streetscape provisions for the zone, because I think with some further amendment, it could be a very successful contemporary infill development. This is the only site in this section of Robert Street where the development plan can come into play, because most of them are existing renovated houses that are not going to change, and the home units are not going to change, and the recent two-storey, the 1980s and 1990s two-storey reproductions, they're not going to change. So this is the only site that's actually going to have...
I'm going to see if you've got a seconder for your motion, Sandy. Do you have a seconder for that deferral? Looks like that lapses for want of a seconder. Members? Do you have a seconder? Thank you, Brenton. I'll open up for discussion. We have no discussion, members.
I would like to actually see what the
I'd take that as a compliment. Sandy, I'm supportive of the motion, so I'm happy to hear from you, but I'm not sure that it's going to make any difference.
I mean, for
and
what
it is running really late in the night.
Well, for what it's worth, I can't see how the building is going to be invisible. The fact that there's a whole lot of landscaping in the front, that will all go when the new house is built. So then it will be visible. So to consider that it's not going to be visible when it's there to be seen between those two villas of very similar form, I think one will find that it's quite visible when it's built. And whilst I can see the endeavours that have been made to relate to certain elements, I think if you saw that in perspective, it would look like a narrow building with a wide gap on the left-hand side, which I think would look a bit like a little cottage between all the villas with a big gap to the side of it. Whereas if it had a wall height that it got right the way across, even if it didn't have a roof, if at least was an 11.5 metre wide building with a matching wall height contemporary, then it would better, it would achieve what the development plan is seeking. So I'm being able to visualise what that would look in 3D, I'm not convinced that it will achieve what the development plan seeks to achieve.
Jenny, did you wish to sum up? I'll put the motion. All those in favour? All those against? That's carried. Do you have an approval? Thank you. Members, we have a motion to move into confidence. Can I have a mover and seconder, please? Jenny and Roger. All those in favour? All those against?